A heartbreaking case out of Norfolk, Virginia, has left even seasoned investigators shaken. A young couple, two people barely in their 20s, now sit behind bars for the death of their 9-day-old daughter, Ijaya, a child who never even had the chance to see her first sunrise outside the walls of a tent. 24-year-old Hilary Darnell Johnson, 2 and 22-year-old Zabrea Chantel Parker. Two names that, until recently, meant nothing to the world. Now they are forever tied to a story that feels almost unbearable to retell. Johnson has been sentenced to 19 years in prison for second-degree murder. Parker to 10 years for felony child abuse. The sentencing happened months apart in two different courtrooms, but the shadow of what they did or failed to stop will follow both of them for the rest of their lives. May 4th, 2024, a quiet, humid afternoon in Norfolk. Two young parents walk into the Children's Hospital of the King's Daughters. The father carries something wrapped in a blanket. Nurses notice the man's hands trembling, not from grief, but from something else. Confusion, fear, guilt. Inside the blanket lies a newborn. She's not breathing. Her body is cold to the touch. The staff rush to help, but it's too late. The baby is gone. The parents say her name is Ijaya, 9 days old. They tell the doctors she fell from her stroller 2 days earlier while Johnson was jogging. They didn't have money. They didn't have a home. They were living in a tent. They say they tried to treat her injuries with witch hazel, peroxide, and gauze. They say they brought her in only when she stopped breathing. It's a story full of holes, and everyone in that room knows it. Doctors and nurses start examining the baby. The truth reveals itself in silence. Burns on the bottoms of her feet, cuts on her scalp and face, bruises on her back, and later, in the autopsy, broken ribs, internal bleeding. I pause here because even to read these words feels like violence. A 9-day-old child. How much force does it take to break ribs that tiny? To bruise a body that fragile? The doctors knew instantly this was no accident. So the question becomes, why lie? Was it fear of going to jail? Shame? Or were they so detached from reality that they believed the lie themselves? People sometimes think that monsters are born, that killers are different from us. But what if the truth is uglier? What if they were just two broken people, too immature, too unstable, too desperate, and the child became a mirror reflecting their failure? The press release said they lived in a tent. That one detail matters more than it seems. Imagine that tent, damp, hot, cluttered. No crib, no proper bed. A newborn crying through the night while the city lights flicker, just beyond the canvas walls. Hunger, exhaustion, frustration, building with every sound that wouldn't stop. Could that be where it began? Did the crying trigger something? A memory, a rage, a helplessness? Did Hilary Johnson lose control? Or was it Parker, the mother, overwhelmed, snapping under pressure, not knowing how to quiet her child? We don't know. The court couldn't prove who delivered the final blow. But the evidence, the injuries pointed more strongly toward Johnson. Still, both are guilty in the eyes of morality. Because to hurt is one sin. To watch and do nothing is another. When we talk about child abuse, we often picture a single act of violence. But true abuse is rarely sudden. It's a pattern, a gradual decay of empathy. Maybe at first it was just shouting, then grabbing, then shaking. Maybe after each time they told themselves, "We didn't mean it. It won't happen again." But it did. And that's the hardest truth. Cruelty becomes easier the more it's repeated. So I ask myself, what kind of mind can look at a newborn and still cause pain? Is it hatred? No, hatred requires energy. This kind of violence is colder, mechanical, almost detached. It's the violence of people who've lost touch with empathy. I imagine the last night of Ajaya's life. She's not eating anymore. Her breathing shallow. Her small body covered in wounds her parents tried to hide beneath gauze. Maybe they noticed she was fading. Maybe they told themselves she'd get better. Maybe they even prayed. But as dawn broke, she went still. 2 days passed before they brought her in. 2 days! And that perhaps is the moment that defines the crime. Not the first act of violence, but the silence afterward. Because silence kills too. In court. Neither confessed. Each blamed the other. The truth remained buried under fear and shame. Prosecutors struck a deal. Johnson's child abuse charge dropped in exchange for a murder plea. Parker's murder charge dropped for a child abuse plea. The judge said nothing dramatic. No lecture. Just numbers, 19 years, 10 years. The courtroom was quiet. There were no tears, no family shouting. Just the sound of papers being signed, the sound of justice trying to make sense of something senseless. What drives someone to kill their own child? Psychologists describe a phenomenon called filicide by frustration. It happens when parents, often young and impoverished, feel trapped, incapable of caring for their baby, overwhelmed by constant crying, exhaustion, and hopelessness. In these moments, the baby becomes a symbol of failure. The mind begins to twist. If she stops crying, everything will be okay. But rage and helplessness are a deadly mix. In seconds, a hand becomes a weapon. Maybe that's what happened here. The burns, however, point to something darker: punishment, not accident. And punishment of a newborn reveals something closer to sadism, or at least a complete collapse of moral perception. When I read this case, I don't see monsters. I see a tragedy: two young adults who never should have been parents, trying to survive in a world that gave them no tools, no home, no guidance. But poverty isn't an excuse for cruelty. Countless poor parents still protect their children with everything they have. So the real horror is not poverty itself. It's emotional emptiness, a hollowness where empathy should be. That emptiness killed Ijaya long before her body stopped breathing. There is no victim more vulnerable than a newborn baby, said Commonwealth's attorney Ruman Fatehi. Ijaya came into the world in need of love and protection. What she got instead was suffering and death. His words linger because they're true, and because they force us to confront a painful question. How does a society protect children from the people meant to love them most? Ijaya lived for 9 days. 9 days between her first cry and her last breath. 9 days in a world that failed her at every level: family, system, humanity. When I think of her, I don't think of her parents' guilt or their prison time. I think of the silence after she stopped crying. I think of the hospital light reflecting on her still face. And I wonder if love had come one day sooner, would she still be here?